Trigger warning to our listeners. This episode contains mature topics that can be graphic, such as racial violence and references to sexual violence. Also, other unsavory things.
Maybe listen with some AirPods by yourself and not around any children.
Yeah, what she said. Welcome to Baddies for the People. I'm Rachel Pearl Jacobs.
And I'm Cheyenne Hunt.
And we're your resident baddies.
Let's get into it.
Welcome back, baddies.
And you know how we start.
What's the tea, Cheyenne? I forgot for a sec. Sorry, guys.
The tea with me this week is we've been making this podcast for a little while now.
Longer than I've ever been in a relationship.
I'm your long-term relationship.
Correct.
And I've really been thinking about how hard it is to put yourself out there. And people might like roll their eyes at me saying that because obviously I'm like on social media and I ran for Congress. Like I put myself out there. I do it
out there,
a lot.
gosh.
And it never gets easier, especially when you're doing something new or different. And also people never stop judging you. Like, I'm not here to give you some kind of like weird pep talk that's not rooted in reality. People absolutely, every time you try something new, every time you put yourself out there, it's just like a guarantee. So you have to be like mentally prepared for that. And that doesn't get easier, but you get more mentally prepared for it. And the surprising part to me is how often the people who are going to judge you the harshest are the ones that love you the most and that are the closest people to you in your life. I have experienced that every time I've really gone for something, where you would think like these people who would be your biggest cheerleaders are usually the ones who come back and are like, oh my God, why are you doing that? That's cringy. Or like, I don't know about that. Like, are you sure that's really what you want to do? And sometimes it's like the people that are the furthest from your immediate orbit that are like cheering you on, that are like, oh my God, I love this, go for it. And I feel like I'm guilty of this too. Like, why do we do that? Like, why is it that some influencer that we follow, that we have some parasocial relationship with, we cheer them on, we're their biggest cheerleader. We want them to go out there and go for it and take that new opportunity. But like our friend from high school that's starting a small business, or our sister who starts making content online, like we're not their biggest cheerleaders. Very rarely are you believing in them and cheering them on and liking and commenting or patronizing their small business and sharing it with the people that you know and love. And that sucks. And I think part of it is like capitalism conditions us to believe that something that's already like a packaged good is got the seal of approval of like the market. I don't know. I also think part of it is like, we care about the people that we love and they care about you. And sometimes that lack of encouragement is coming from fear and they don't want to see you embarrass yourself. And it's something that they're afraid to do. So they're trying to protect you. Also, sometimes you really putting yourself out there and going for it is disturbing their worldview that they've gotten comfortable in, that they shouldn't put themselves out there because there's no point. And it's threatening and it breeds resentment. And that's also not your fault. So I'm thinking about it again because it's really hard to make something like this and have people you know consume it. I've always said I would rather complete strangers watch my TikToks. I would rather call people when I was campaigning who I didn't know than call people in my life. And that's really common when you talk to content creators, when you talk to people who run for office. And that's sad. And so I really think that like we should try to pay it forward to the people in our lives who are really going for it. And that's what I've been thinking about. So that's my tea.
I only have 5 friends. So like, I actually like all my friends and they're not competing with me. So I can't really relate in the same way to that. Growing up, putting myself out there was just being myself. And because I was different, and that came with like a ton of like cyberbullying and harassment and like people just kind of being obsessed with me. That sounds really conceited, but I don't know how else to explain like people's fixation on harassing you other than them being obsessed with you. But I'm very lucky that I have a supportive sphere and family, but also I am unapologetic in how I move and show up. So this is like really on brand.
On brand for you.
Yeah.
I also just think it's really, when I've talked to people about it, it's really common, even if it's not like you're in direct competition with somebody, they're challenged by the idea that you're changing.
Oh, I think maybe it's just that everyone's always known I'm a star. And I've told them if they didn't know.
They signed the waiver, they know.
Correct. Like if I told you I'm a star.
I feel like I was very much clear with my intention with like the closest people in my circle. It's just looked a lot different. I think they anticipated a really traditional path, like the courtroom or the boardroom. And I have taken some different steps. So, you know, you either roll with it or you don't. You get left behind.
I mean, I think also you're like an entrepreneur. So like you're doing your own thing. And I think that's really courageous because I would never want to like own my own business. Like that's a lot of responsibility. I have plants. I don't even have pets. Okay. So that's just to know that I'd have to like pay myself, like make enough to live and like do all this other stuff. Like that's extra. I can just be really great at something and some existing organization can pay me to show up.
So what I'm hearing is when this podcast takes off, I will manage the LLC and pay you as, you know, an employee.
I mean, managing, that's a different discussion. Like, oh God.
Anyway, that's my tea. And if you take one thing away from it, try to be the biggest cheerleader for the people in your life, not just the people that you follow online. And with that, I want to know, Rachel, what's your tea?
So my tea is that we lost our trial. Wow. I haven't really talked about this. I didn't realize that I was going to like be really emotional. But it is devastating. I'm really sad about it. I, on one hand, feel like I've lost hope in humanity and people's ability to see Black people as human beings. On the other hand, I know there was a bunch of legal factors in this, but ultimately the underlying thing that I took away from this trial is that if you are someone who society has discarded as being unworthy, whether that means you're put through the prison system or you're on government aid or you are disadvantaged and systemically oppressed in some way, they don't really think you have rights. So the rights that we think are guaranteed to us, like the right to be free from excessive force, the right not to get shot in the back, the right to life, it's just not, it's not a right. And if people think that you're not worthy because of your decisions, then it's okay for people to kill you. Yeah. So my tea is we lost. We're going to appeal, but I'm pretty bummed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, from what you've shared with me, the facts of this case were pretty egregious. The body cam footage, which is not like, we're not going to link it right now because of the likely appeal, but I've seen it and it's, I mean, we're talking about somebody that literally is getting shot in the back as he's running away, just like murdered in cold blood. And it's one thing what they teach you in law school, like what the law is and what your rights are. But when you see in the courtroom what actually gets enforced and how that justice plays out, those are totally different rights. If the right doesn't apply to you because you're Black or they've decided that you're a gangbanger, that is a totally different reality. And, you know, I will say it, I've said it before, I'll say it again. The work that Rachel does is so underappreciated because the trauma that you go through in bearing witness to this shit over and over and over and over again and sitting with these people and their families and their loved ones and really taking that to heart, especially like people who look like you, and taking that to trial and fighting and sometimes losing because that's part of the system. That is so important. It goes so underappreciated. And I don't think people realize the toll that it takes.
Yeah. I don't think people really realize that George Floyd happens every day. And we voted to increase funding for police departments. I don't know. In this trial, the defense counsel said you cannot wait until a suspect points a gun at you because then you're dead. You have to shoot them before that. So it's really if someone's afraid of you and the defense counsel can convince the jurors to be afraid of you and your family, there's nothing that you can do. And I mean, that's what implicit bias is.
Yeah.
And it's actually really heartbreaking. I spent all this time with his family, with his mom. It was recently like Trayvon Martin's birthday, and it makes me think of my client because he would be turning 30 February 11th.
Yeah.
Yeah, like people can decide that you're not worthy of a future. And I don't really know like how to process that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really fresh. It's disappointing. Obviously there's, appeals, but I think there's also just recognizing that a jury of our peers or their peers, 12 people from the same, within 20 miles of the courthouse where this happened, 9 of them thought what that officer did was okay.
Yeah.
And I have so many cases like this. So yeah, it comes and goes in waves. There's also just like, okay, can you do this work and not be this emotionally invested? And I don't really know. Because if you have empathy, you see the way that the loved one of these individuals losing their loved one, the impact that it has had on them.
Yeah.
And I guess, I don't know, I imagine the impact that it would have on me.
Yeah.
If some of these things happened. It's also that he was only 2 years older than me. And if my circumstances were different, this could be me.
Yep.
So
it's so important that you are speaking this truth right now. I think it's so easy, and people expect, especially in the legal profession, that you put on a brave face and you act with deference to the legal system. And that's just how these things go. And that's justice. And you move on. If you're litigating a corporate M&A, sure. But when you're talking about someone that was shot in cold blood that looks just like you and you're doing that work all the time and a jury comes back and says, actually, we don't respect him as a human being. Because that's really in effect what happened. And I know that there will be lawyers who will listen to this who will nitpick that, but like really think about it. I don't give a shit if you want to talk about it.
For the lawyers who want to nitpick, they found that he was not intentionally touched, even though
he was fucking shot.
I mean, yeah. So, I don't know. I just don't even, it's kind of unreal. But I can do what I can, which is, make a motion for a new trial and make a motion for judgment notwithstanding the verdict. And if it's denied, we can file an appeal. But the only other thing that was really disappointing to me in this case was that it was the first time I experienced going against defense counsel that I feel like I lost a lot of respect for, because they didn't move ethically. And I guess I've been lucky that up until this point, you can dislike defense counsel, you can dislike their arguments, but playing dirty is just, I don't know, I don't think this is a game. I think that's what it is. I remember that it's not, oh, I'm trying to do this for my client. It's like, these people have lives. This is about someone whose life was lost. We have already lost if there was a game, because my client will never talk to her son again. And no trial record is more valuable than recognizing that loss, enforcing the system to recognize that loss. Because what happened is not okay. But according to this jury, based on like our society, it is acceptable. So I don't know how we exit out of this.
I know that we do this tea segment and usually it's really superfluous stuff that's going on in life, but part of why we do it is because we want to share with you the real ups and downs of being, as Brene Brown says, in the arena.
Yeah, so actually it's just because I had no updates on my non-existent dating life.
So you decided to get real with us today?
Yeah, so that's my tea.
She's got these sick sunglasses on now for those who can't see.
I did want to wear them just because I feel cool in them. So
there you go. That's it.
At some point I'll take them off, but for now, I just feel like this is a vibe. Do you have any sunglasses that you could put on?
Not on me, unfortunately. I wish I did. We could
Usually
match.
I actually have like some in my car.
Might be. I wasn't prepared for this.
Wait, no, I have some in my car. You want to wear them? I actually have multiple pair in my car.
That's it. I mean, with the tea, you're going to get the real tea. We're going to spill it on our lives.
I better not go viral on my like podcast vulnerability. I'm going to be really salty.
They're going to get your like Michael Jordan cry face. It's going to be a meme.
Literally.
Dylan.
Don't do that.
No, it'd be kind of funny. I mean, I could be like Kim.
Okay, fine. I guess do it.
I mean, it's never, I don't know. I don't think, I feel better about it already.
Welcome to the Space Jam.
I don't think you're like an ugly crier. That was very demure. It was a very
mindful. Okay.
Anyway, Rachel, what are we doing next?
So, Cheyenne, what made you cringe this week?
My cringe this week is Trump's extended his attacks on DEI and on pronouns beyond just purely symbolic executive orders. He's now having those orders enforced by basically going to war with science. We're talking about attacking the National Science Foundation and the NIH. And specifically, there's a long list of banned words that studies cannot contain. Otherwise, that research is getting halted or even pulled off the internet. It's a really long list, so I'm just going to read you a few examples. Studies cannot contain the word advocacy, barrier, diversity, ethnicity, female, trans, gender, historically, institutional, minority, racially, socioeconomic, systemic, trauma, victims, and women. So basically, any science or study or research related to anything that has a system, anything that has an institution, which basically is the entire system of society, the world. Also, women's health. None of that's getting funded. Nobody's getting research grants to do any of this work. And once again, I want to be abundantly clear. This all comes from an order that was marketed as an attack on radical transgenderism. And we have all been saying this is a ruse to attack all of us, women included. And here it is. So I'm cringing because people don't realize that these attacks on DEI also mean you. Greg Abbott is out here passing orders in Texas saying he doesn't want any markers of DEI in the state capitol. Dude, they're going to take your wheelchair ramp out. Like, you're not going to be able to get into the building.
Yo, I'm sorry, but I'm saying it now. Previously in other episodes, we've censored me. But
I'm going to censor it again.
You're not going to censor
I am.
Governor Hot Wheels.
Censored. Immediately censored. Because we're not going to be ableist.
I'm not an ableist. He's the ableist. He's the one who's taking out ramps and making everything accessible for all people. He is the ableist, which makes him Governor Hot Wheels. Because he's tripping off a cliff. Okay?
Okay. All right. I don't co-sign on that.
If there's anyone in a wheelchair that I have offended, I'm deeply apologetic. But fuck Greg Abbott.
I will co-sign on that.
Governor Hot Wheels head ass.
So that's what made me cringe this week. Rachel, what made you cringe?
So my cringe this week is that Louisiana has indicted a doctor from New York for prescribing an abortion pill to a minor. They've also indicted said minor's mother And there's so many questions that I have. First of all, who told them? Who told the state of Louisiana that this young girl had an abortion? Like, snitches get stitches for being punk bitches. Like, what are we doing? Okay. Now, more seriously,
I
though.
feel like that should be a form of, this is going to be controversial. I feel like that should be like a way that we organize. Like, we should have in these super restrictive abortion states, like snitches get stitches crews, because they're trying to incentivize people to basically police abortions. Well, then we should be policing you, and you should get the shit kicked out of you for that. Period.
Imagine people protesting in front of police stations instead of protesting in front of abortion clinics.
Planned Parenthoods.
Yeah.
I love that. We should totally do that.
I also work on police violence cases. I mean, police protest cases. And I just like, they would shoot you guys. Like, maybe not with lethals, but these things called less than lethals, which are like rubber bullets or like bean bags.
Which can also actually kill you.
People up. Okay. Yeah. Like, they don't just mess people up. I'm trying not to cuss. See? But okay. Anyway.
I know. We've got you all heated. This is what I do.
Yeah. So I just don't think that Louisiana has jurisdiction over a New York doctor either.
Yeah, they don't right now, but they want it to go through the court system so that they can argue that they do. They want to be able to get this conservative court to make this abortion thing a national federal issue. And they lied to you when they said that they wanted it to be a states' rights thing. And right now they're proving it because they're going after someone in New York.
I just want to know where all the moderate conservatives are, because everyone acts like this is just the extremists who are doing this stuff. But then where's the rest of the party to rein them in?
Yeah, shouldn't they be outraged?
So yeah, that's my cringe.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, usually we would go into the vibes from here, but we've prepared something very special for you all. Something steamy, something I might say is a little vibey, and it's deep. So we're going to call it the Vibey Deep Dive. Rachel's face.
What? The Vibey Deep Dive? I thought it was the deep vibes.
Oh, I like that too. We're going to go, I like yours better.
Usually in the vibes, we talk about pop culture. And usually in the deep dive, we talk about politics. So today we're combining them and giving you the deep vibes where we talk about porn.
That's right. We're doing a porn episode. And if you are in absolute shock right now, wondering why the baddies want to have a conversation about pornography, let us explain, okay? Just give us the benefit of the doubt. And if it weirds you out, put your AirPods in, listen to this one by yourself. It's not going to get raunchy, but it is going to get real. Porn is interwoven with every aspect of our culture and our lives, whether we're talking about the law, politics, culture, or education. Porn impacts all of that, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. And millennials and Gen Z are the first real generations to grow up with unfettered access to internet pornography. It is entirely different than our parents' generations that, maybe stole their dad's Hustlers magazine or went over to the neighbor's house with a few friends to sneak a peek at that old VHS tape. It's an entirely different form of access, meaning that it's impacting our culture in a much different, larger way. And we should look at it critically.
Like Cheyenne said, Americans consume a lot of porn. A study in 2016 found that among Americans 18 to 39, 46% of men and 16% of women consumed pornography in any given week. Most of this happened on the internet. And in 2018, the 5 biggest porn sites received a combined 6 billion views per month. Pornhub is the 11th most visited site in 2024, placing it above X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram. Sadly, this is not just limited to adults. According to a 2007 study of students aged 13 to 14 in Alberta, Canada, 90% of boys reported accessing sexually explicit media. 35% said they had viewed porn too many times to count.
Yeah, I mean, in the United States, the age of the average American boy, the first time he sees internet pornography, is 11 years old. So we're also not just talking about something that's impacting adults here. And we should start off by really being abundantly clear that that's the case, because it also justifies the need to have a conversation about this and the way that it shapes society.
What Cheyenne said, just in a really long way, is that we're talking about it because the personal is political.
Yeah. And on the personal is political, I know that that sounds like a great talking point, but this has been a feminist rallying cry for a really long time. It's the idea throughout history that things that were uncomfortable to talk about, or things that the hierarchical structure of society didn't really want to see changed, were deemed as things that were personal matters. So whether or not someone was domestically abused in the home, well, that's personal. Whether or not we should make it illegal to beat your child with a switch, that's a personal matter. Sometimes even whether or not, the people in the house are earning enough money to pay their mortgage, that's really personal. But the personal is political. And these things make their way out into the public square if we actually want to see change. And I think that's also true about pornography, sex education, women's rights, misogyny, all of the things that are going to be tied up in this discussion today. These are inherently political things. And I hope that we can make that case to you more clearly as we have this conversation.
So, being a word nerd, I wanted a real definition of porn, and it was hard to find one. We know that the root word of porn is pornographo, which means whore painting, and that's Greek. What?
It's just never not funny. That's a great transition, Rachel, into really covering why porn is a social construct and why that matters. If something's inherently hard to define, that's like a good hint that this is something that is shaped mostly by society and their feelings about it. Being a social construct basically means that something's meaning is derived from all the ideas, all of the feelings, all of the judgments and influences that society puts upon it. And porn is so loaded. It's such a loaded term. You have a lot of feelings about it. That tells you that it's definitely a social construct. And if you needed any more proof, it's really difficult to define even for Supreme Court justices. When they were famously tasked with coming up for a definition or a legal standard of pornography, the best they could come up with was, quote, "I know it when I see it." And that's truly how porn is in the modern era. It's hard to distinguish what is high art that belongs in the Smithsonian that really honors the features of the female form versus what's pornography. And that, again, just comes down to the opinions and the pressures of society.
Any porn connoisseur knows that there's a lot of types of porn. So we're going to start with what's most popular, which is internet porn. Y'all know I had to get into my scientific bag. So I looked into the top 20 porn stars on Pornhub.
I'm sure it was purely scientific.
I didn't actually go on Pornhub. In my research, I determined that 17 of the 20 were women, 3 were men, but all were cisgender, and most look white. The women are usually short, which I am, slim, young, and have big boobies.
Tracks.
The men are tall, muscularly built, and have the long schlongs, obviously.
Oh, yep. Okay. For sure. So that's what they look like. But what are they doing? Well, a 2020 study found that 45% of Pornhub scenes contained at least one act of physical aggression, and 97% of the time, that was towards women. Overwhelmingly, their response to the aggression was positive or neutral, rarely ever negative.
I had to look deeper into what they meant by positive, neutral, and rarely ever negative. And for those of you out there who don't get it, they're talking about women who pretended to like it.
Yeah, which, we'll talk about it later, but it's one thing to enjoy things within the bounds of a consenting relationship, and it's another thing when it's potentially coerced under a capitalist structure. And I also think it's another thing when a lot of people are watching this and getting ideas about women and what they like and how they should perform sex.
Exactly, because in mainstream porn, women exist to supply male pleasure. They're commodities. So if women have orgasms, They're just expected. No like effort is put into it. There's no foreplay. There's no lube.
Yeah, women's pleasure is clearly not the point. Anyone who's ever like actually had sex with a woman in real life and she's really enjoyed it can look back at most mainstream porn and tell you that women's pleasure is not the point. And if they don't know that, something is seriously wrong. I think this is a good point to mention, since we're kind of dunking on all porn right now, that this isn't like entirely universal. There is a whole wing of the industry that started to blossom in feminist porn, indie creators who are going out of their way to try to platform more diverse performers of different races and ethnicities and body types and genders, sexualities. That being said, this is far from mainstream. Most of it's behind a paywall, and folks are so accustomed to pornography being free that that's a huge barrier to entry. It's also just not what's popular, and so it's not being consumed at the same rates.
The difference between independent porn sites and mainstream porn is also that the porn there isn't free. People really don't have an issue with paying for OnlyFans, but the experience is different because it's personalized rather than feeling like a video was made for the general public.
Yeah,
is my thought.
OnlyFans is also really new, and that's a whole other area of porn and sexual content where we don't have a good idea yet of what the impact is going to be long term, socially, economically, for the people who consume it and for these creators. We do know now that OnlyFans creators, there's a defense of this for those who are trying to say that this is somehow revolutionizing the porn industry and really changing some of these misogynistic stereotypes, because they're independent creators. They can do whatever they want. They're not subject to the same pressures of being on set with other performers and a production crew. And yet at the same time, they are doing this work under capitalism, which has pressures. And if this is what you're doing to try and make ends meet and make money, you are likely to want to produce what's popular. And what's popular is being shaped by mainstream porn.
In studies of cam models, sociologist Angela Jones found that cam models who were the most likely to be successful were cisgender women who performed femininity in socially desirable ways. They played up qualities of youthfulness, singleness, and bisexuality. They made people feel wanted. But the downside of porn is that it incentivizes creators to do more extreme things to distinguish themselves and carve out a profitable niche.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, is when you're an OnlyFans model or you're a cam girl, that's a massively competitive market. I know that they don't necessarily want you to think that. There's this idea that everybody's making millions of dollars on OnlyFans. There's a study that found that the average creator is making like $1,300 a year. So it's incredibly competitive, and there's a lot of pressure to basically just succumb to doing what's popular, even if that's not necessarily what you want to do. And that's like a broader conversation about like, what is consent under capitalism? And like, if you have to do things to make ends meet and you're doing them out of that kind of existential pressure of you have to put food on the table, is that really consensual? But that's like a whole broader other conversation. I just wanted to like throw that out there for you to chew on in the context of this conversation.
Well, I'm going to bring up the elephant in the room. This is the topic that all the girlies are talking about, but no one's acknowledging. Smut.
Smut, book talk, you know it, you love it, you pretend it's not porn and you read it in public, but it is.
I see you guys reading on the bus.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot of shit about porn, how misogynistic the whole industry is, that it's for the male gaze. Smut is really taking that and turning it on its head. We're talking about a genre that is mostly by women, for women, with the readership being over 84% women. But that being said, there are some ways in which it is obviously different and a lot of surprising ways in which it's kind of not. And we should go over that and really pick apart what's changed and what hasn't.
So, first of all, Nielsen estimates that 14.3 million romance novels were sold between January and August of 2022. We know that sadly people aren't reading anymore, but sales of romance novels increased approximately 52%.
That's crazy.
The real question is, does smut push back against mainstream porn, or is it the same ideas all over again? Well, let's find out.
One of the main differences between book talk smut and mainstream porn is that these characters actually have character and there's a plot that develops. It's not always the greatest plot you've ever read in the history of literature, but it's definitely better than the pizza guy or the plumber that knocks on the door. Before we break this down any further, I want to give some massive props to our producer, Alex, who spent way too much time doing dedicated research, not that kind of research. But what he did do was he looked at 63 of the top 77 romance bestsellers that made it onto the New York Times bestseller list. From there, he took a look at romance.io, a review site where people who actually read these novels can tag them with themes related to what was actually in the books. He was able to build out this beautiful table that showed us all of these popular books, popular themes, what they contained. And from that, we can break down for you the rest of basically this deep dive.
Demographically, the main characters are still overwhelmingly white, but at least 10 of the 60 titles that Alex looked at had a non-white love interest.
That's a lot better than mainstream porn.
However, it was almost entirely straight and cisgender, except for 3 of the novels.
Yeah, still not great.
But let's talk about these main characters in a little more detail. The women in these stories are actual people. Over 75% of them are described as take charge or some other variation.
That's very different from what we're seeing in mainstream porn, with 97% of them being super stoked about being abused.
There's also a diversity of personalities, occupation, and class. Also, there's a big diversity in bodies. I feel like in porn, you only see the extremes. You don't see normal looking people. Yeah. And smut does a really good job of having all body types.
I don't know if I would say all, but at least a better spectrum. And I also think that that's part of why women like it, though, too, is you still have some agency over what that character is going to look like when you read it, how you're going to envision it. And so even in the ways that it might fail to have perfect body diversity, you still have the agency to read a little bit of yourself into it potentially, or something that feels more human.
So let's talk about the men. It was about 50-50 in terms of alpha male, grumpy, possessive types, and Labrador retrievers. I don't even know what to say about that because
it's giving the guy's Tinder bio that you read last week.
Equality ? IDK.
Aggressive golden retriever. This, to me, this part of the discussion, and this, when I saw this data that Alex pulled together, this was where I thought, wow, okay, maybe not all that much did change from mainstream porn to smut, because the way that we're seeing men depicted in these books, there's a lot of aggressive, possessive types of behaviors. There's also a lot of controlling type behaviors. There were a lot of tags for things like forced proximity, for things like abduction. And so that part is giving a little bit of misogyny to me.
Also, them being tall and having masculine occupations like warriors, CEO, athletes, real providers, people who could just be
for a second, I thought
idolized.
that you said warrior and CEO together, like they were warrior CEOs, which is like a really interesting picture.
I think this is also reflected in the fact that there's definitely a lot of power dynamic stuff going on. In about a third of the books, an age gap was featured. There was also teacher coach and boss employee dynamics because everybody loves a good forbidden relationship. Speaking of relationship, let's talk about the sex.
We should definitely talk about it because while we're having a conversation about porn, the ratings of these books suggest that the sex might not actually be the most important part to many readers. Of the books that Alex looked through, roughly 50% of them didn't have any sex-related tags by reviewers. This suggests that the character elements of these books are what's most interesting to a good number of these readers. However, we know there's sex in them based on the spice levels. If you're familiar with Book Talk, you know all about spice levels. Essentially, it's a rating 1 out of 5 chili peppers that gives you a sense of how frequently and intensely these characters are engaging in sexual acts.
There are 2 main conclusions that we can take away from smut. The first is that women like it when the people they have sex with are real people, whereas men seem to prefer having sex with objects. The other piece is that these books are responsive to the desires of women, whereas porn seems to have shaped the desires of men.
Ooh, that was deep.
Da, 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 da. Welcome to Porn Wars, where we talk about the obscene relationship between porn and the law.
Bum bum. I don't know how we got Star Wars and like Law and Order in there. That's crazy. Olivia Benson rolling up with R2D2.
Porn has a really complicated relationship with the law, and that rests on the ever contentious definition of obscenity. In 1957, the Supreme Court ruled in Roth versus United States that obscenity was not protected under the First Amendment. The court doesn't really define what obscenity is, though. That all changes in 1973 with Miller v. California. This is the same case that established the Miller test, which is still the test for obscenity. Under the test, you have to have all 3 of the following. 1, whether the average person applying contemporary community standards would find that the work taken as a whole appeals to the prurient interest. 2, whether the work depicts or describes in a patently offensive way sexual conduct or excretory functions specifically defined by applicable state law. And 3, whether the work taken as a whole lacks serious, literary, artistic, political, or scientific value.
This test is interesting because if you don't know what prurient interest means, essentially it means it turns you on. And also, the test later says you have to find it patently offensive. So one legal scholar has noted essentially the impossibility of this test, saying that in order for something to really qualify as obscenity, it would have to simultaneously both turn you on and disgust you, which for most people, those 2 things don't overlap. So for the most part, even though they have this test and obscenity isn't protected under the First Amendment, almost nothing actually legally gets called obscenity. And so for the most part, porn has been free and clear of the law for modern history.
Dun dun. So the next segment of Porn Wars features the war between the left and the right, because oddly enough, both have criticisms of porn.
Just almost never for the same reason.
And they will likely never join forces because of the ideological differences that are fundamental to their belief system.
So let's take a journey through the right and their issues with porn. This goes way, way, way back, but I think if we're going to do a case study, we should look at the late Reverend Jerry Falwell and his moral majority. He started as a radio preacher, for those of you who aren't familiar with him, and he fought the nation's, quote, moral decline, specifically against homosexuality, communism, abortion, and the Equal Rights Amendment. This also included the civil rights movement and porn. So
that's why he founded Liberty University, which started out as a segregation academy and is now the bastion of conservative cucks. You heard it right, ladies and gentlemen, conservative cucks, because his son, the former president of the university, Jerry Falwell Jr., likes to be cucked by his pool boy.
Rachel's been trying to talk about Jerry Falwell Jr. on every single episode of this podcast, and I've edited it out every time. And just for you, I'm going to leave it in today. No, that's what she said in the porn episode. Okay. Anyway, in 1979, Falwell Sr. founds his group, Moral Majority, and they were basically a political organization for evangelicals. Up until this point, evangelicals weren't super politically active, like as a group, and they didn't move as like a monolith. He really changed that, and that was integral in getting Ronald Reagan elected. Reagan, after getting elected, goes on to form the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography, which produced a report nearly 2,000 pages long that ultimately found that pornography was a detriment to American society.
The formal moral majority disbanded in 1989, but the conservative cuckolding terror group has continued on to modern day. Evangelicals and conservatives never stopped caring about porn.
Now it's coming to the new technical era, and my favorite example of this is the app Covenant Eyes. If you feel like that sounds a little bit familiar, think about our current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, because he once admitted, for some reason, even though you literally couldn't beat this out of me if you tried, that he and his son have this app together. And what it does is for $16.99 a month, it keeps track of what websites you go to on your phone and blocks immoral ones that have porn. And for an even higher fee, it reports to your ally if you've been trying to look at porn. So Mike Johnson literally admitted that his son will get a text message if he tries to look at pornography. And that's normal.
Well, our other favorite far-right group, the Manosphere, also takes issue with porn. One of the bylaws of the Proud Boys prohibits its members from partaking in pornography. Another far-right fucker, Andrew Tate.
I love that the Proud Boys are like, don't watch porn, but do an insurrection. That's fine.
To do the insurrection, you gotta be angry enough.
Yeah, and you can't be angry enough if you're docile from porn.
Even more horrifying, they have a bylaw that says you can't masturbate more than once a month. That's just...
So it makes no sense until you hear this next thing, which is very Manosphere. And who else to really teach us about the way these guys think than the messiah of the toxic masculine Manosphere, Andrew Tate. He is a far-right influencer and an alleged human trafficker who said on Candace Owens' podcast, quote, "Pornography as a whole is simply, I think it's a tool which is used to ensure that the male populace stays as docile as possible. I think that keeping people as docile as possible is very interesting for the people who are in charge of the world because men are the warrior class. And at the end of the day, it's going to boil down to the men who are actually going to stand up and do something about anything." This is also coming from the guy that made all of his money off of a cam girl website in Romania. So if you're so against porn, really weird that you're producing it and also allegedly non-consensually and human trafficking these girls. That's weird. That's suspicious.
Well, the through line in the right's opposition to porn is that it's focused on the damage that they believe porn is doing to men. The impact that porn has on women never comes up.
Yeah, even in the times where their advocacy is reaching out to women, it's mostly wives groups to talk about the impact that porn is having on their husbands. So the whole premise of it is still deeply rooted in misogyny, in that there's no concern, not even awareness of what it may be doing to women. Societally, the women in the pornography, the women who are forced to navigate the world that is shaped by the rampant nature of this pornography, they don't actually care about any of that. They are more worried about the clear-headedness and the righteousness of their men.
So we talked to you about the white male right-wing views on pornography. And now we're going to talk to you about porn and feminism.
That was great. That's a great transition. So, unlike the right and their sole concern for the well-being of men and pornography, the left is deeply concerned about women on a multitude of levels. We're talking about the women that are performing the pornography, and that means their safety, their protection as workers in an industry that is essentially barely legal and not well funded, well protected, well resourced. We're also talking about an overall concern for women who are existing in a society that is shaped by porn and its cultural impact. This is a more holistic view, I would say.
But don't forget about women's identities being reduced to their sexuality.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it, is they don't like the idea that women are being commodified by pornography being so rampant. And that's separate from talking about the performers. They're saying that the prolific nature of pornography has the effect on society of taking the view of all women and boiling it down to solely what they have to offer for sexual pleasure. I do want to be clear that we're talking about feminists as if they were one mind, but this was not a group of people that were a monolith. The second wave feminists had very different ways that they were kind of approaching sexuality and porn, and that influences where we are now. In a lot of ways, the pro-sex and free sexual expression feminists kind of won out in that battle. But there's definitely still division amongst the ways that women and feminist leaders are talking about porn, sex, porn performers, and whether or not this should exist, should be consumed. It's all kind of still up for hot debate. One of the reasons that some second wave feminists were very skeptical of pornography bans, and rightfully so, was because they were wary of the idea that any legislation banning pornography would ultimately be used to attack women and any sense of their sexuality, period. Let's see. Betty Friedan wrote about this, and she said, "My own book, The Feminine Mystique, which helped to start the modern women's movement, was suppressed as pornographic in libraries in the Midwest. Why? I don't know. Its passion was for the personhood of women."
Others, like Ellen Willis, defended porn as a healthy expression of human sexuality. She was in part responding to the anti-sex feminist movement, which is way too much to get in here. But today, the anti-porn feminist movement isn't really as popular for two big reasons. One, the Sex Positive Project, which was pioneered by activists like Willis, rejected the moralism of the anti-sex and anti-porn feminist movement and argued that women were sexual beings in their own right. And two, the worries about censorship. Even critics of mainstream porn today aren't necessarily anti-porn. This includes the feminist pornographers mentioned earlier and the sex work is work movement.
So that's the pornography wars. And as you can tell, they're not exactly settled yet. And I have some more unsatisfying news for you, which is that the science isn't really settled either. There's been a lot of scientific research and studies funded by both sides and more neutral parties trying to figure out the risks and benefits, if there are any, of pornography and whether or not pornography addiction is something that we should be concerned about. And the best that I can say is that truly the studies are inconclusive. While there are some relationships that may be found between really high rates of porn consumption and negative or detrimental effects, these were purely correlative relationships. Causation could not be drawn clearly. And there was an interesting finding that essentially it wasn't just that they were watching a high amount of porn, which was leading to negative effects. It was more closely correlated to how they felt about the porn that they were watching, whether they thought that it was a problem in their life, that it was out of control, or that there was something morally or ethically wrong with doing so. That was actually more closely correlated with negative effects than the volume of porn itself. The other thing I want to note about the science is it is not actually clear that porn addiction is something that exists. There's a reason it's not in the DSM-5 as a behavioral addiction, and MRI studies don't clearly show a correlation in our neural pathways that mimics something like an addiction to a drug. So the idea that porn is something that can be addictive in that same way is certainly something that is up for debate and is not settled. Getting clear-cut science on something like this is also just generally really difficult, but 45% of neurobiological studies explicitly challenge using an addiction framework for pornography. So suffice it to say, it is unsettled.
There are some things about porn that are settled, and that's that porn as sex ed is a problem. The average American boy starts watching porn at age 11. So porn has become the de facto teacher of sex for Gen Z men.
Yeah, I mean, they're not getting sex ed until they're in middle school or even early high school. And of the sex ed that they're getting, it's usually pretty bad. The vast majority of it, especially in conservative states, is focusing on purely abstinence. They're not getting meaningful sex education. I mean, shit, I grew up in a blue state and there was so much that I didn't learn that you are basically forced out onto the internet to figure out. And what's on offer there is not healthy. It's not normal. And so doctors, psychologists, parents, even porn performers are all in agreement that this is not good sex ed. But the status quo that we have right now is that this is where kids are learning about sex and experiencing it for the first time.
And unfortunately, because parents don't have these conversations with their children, it's just created this generation that doesn't know what pleasure is.
Yeah, especially female pleasure, or doesn't care to know, because their conception of what they should be entitled to sexually is being shaped by something that is purely performative and inherently misogynistic. The idea of a sex education course actually tackling something like pornography is so foreign to us because it's so taboo, especially in having conversations about it with children. I don't even think many of us can wrap our heads around it, but I think it's important to try, because we can't strive to do better until we are willing to get uncomfortable to find solutions. And so Emily Rotham is a public health professor at Boston University. She has a pornography literacy program. And the program is called The Truth About Pornography. It intentionally does not cast value judgments on porn itself, but instead encourages teens to articulate their own moral beliefs about sex and to find ways that their behaviors can match those values. That's a lot different than hearing nearly nothing about the values, the morality, the ethics of sex and watching porn and then acting that out. And so in her program, The Truth About Porn, she has an exercise that I think this is going to be like a brick of an example, but I want you to think about this and how differently this could have shaped because I know a lot of us who listen to this podcast are part of this generation, how differently this could have shaped your conception about sex and porn. The facilitator asks the group, would you be willing to endure your toe being squeezed until you can press a button to tap out? The person who lasts the longest gets prize money. Usually, a lot of the participants are comfortable with this. The next question is, would you be willing to enter a televised challenge of climbing a wall with the possibility that the challenge could be changed at any point? You could technically say no to the challenge, but a lot of people would be angry at you for stopping filming. This time, the group responds with a lot more reservations. Here, they start to understand why pornography may not necessarily be something that you want to act out in real life, and why what they're seeing is not reflective of what real human beings want to encounter when they're in a sexual experience. We can find ways to have appropriate conversations with kids and teens about the material we know that they're engaging with anyway. Putting on blinders and pretending it's not happening is not a way to skillfully engage with them when they are dealing with it, no matter what. And it's shaping their worldview. And whether you like it or not, it's shaping their views of women. Gen Z men and women are facing a historic divide right now in politics, in ideology. They're historically lonely and they're not partnering and they're not having kids. And I don't have the data to back this up, but I'm going to be one of those podcasters that just says shit because I can. I really do think that pornography has something to do with it. And I do think that the dehumanization of women and as sexual partners and as people, and the lack of counter messaging to young boys has led them to feel entitled to women's bodies and as if their pleasure is an irrelevant afterthought in that equation. And who the fuck wants to be part of that? Not me.
So I think there may be a correlation. I don't know about causation, but I do think it's reflected in unconscious biases that people have and why we make the choices that we do.
Rachel, that's a perfect segue into the crescendo of this conversation, because if you're still sitting there wondering, why did I just get a masterclass on porn? And I don't understand why the baddies wanted to take us through this. Let me make it abundantly clear and go back to where we started. The personal is political. And I don't know what's more personal than sex. So the sexual is political. And we're not here to yuck your yum. We're not here to tell you what you can like and what you can't like. But we are here to ask you why you like it. Not that you have to tell us, but to encourage you to ask yourself, and would you still like it if you truly had a free choice? If your desires weren't shaped by a system that was controlled by capitalism, by white supremacy, by fat phobia, by heteronormativity, would you still like what you like if you had true choice? And that doesn't mean if they all existed on the marketplace and they were all free. It also means if you grew up in a society that wasn't shaped by those things, would you still like that? And that's a really difficult exercise to embark upon because it's essentially asking you to unlearn or try to imagine what it would be like if you unlearned the things that shaped your worldview that aren't inherent, like capitalism and misogyny. But what could you like if those things weren't at the forefront and didn't shape basically all the porn you've ever seen? Imagine if you saw something different first. And so that's really what Rachel and I want to talk about and give you the space to think about right now, because it's important. We talked about porn. We talked about smut. We talked about OnlyFans. We talked about all of it. Why? Why are those the things that people want? And I think that a good start to that conversation for me is when I think about the trend in smut of the super powerful, wealthy man that's usually a little bit older than them, that is in a high-powered job, that's very controlling. This is a trope that anybody who has read these books has probably come across. Why do you want that? And I personally, I also get a little bit of the allure. And so let's think about that critically, because for me, that's all capitalism.
I feel personally attacked. I just want to let everyone listening know that there is nothing wrong with liking wealthy, attractive, powerful men.
There's nothing wrong with it, but why is the rich and powerful part of it? And
What do you mean?
Where did that come from?
It came from capitalism and society and a fear of scarcity.
Yeah.
But those of us who have thought really deeply about this know that because the political is so dramatic, you have a better chance of seizing someone else's means of production and redistributing the wealth, which is why being an oligarch's wife makes so much sense.
The thing about it for me is that it is a little bit creepy when you pause and think about the fact that our system of economics has gotten so deeply entrenched in our psychology that it impacts our sexuality. As women, the idea that one of the most popular themes for the porn that we consume is rich, powerful man, because in order for us to feel turned on or safe enough in that story to go along with whatever's happening, that man has to be so incredibly financially stable. And when you really take a step back and think about that, cave women were not how many beads for barter and trade do you have before I have sex with you?
Yeah, but it was a collective society. So that's different because you weren't necessarily worried about having your needs provided for you.
Yeah, it's just crazy. It makes me think, I read this book called Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism. And it was this idea that when we choose our partners and who we're attracted to, the idea that we consider wealth and socioeconomic status is really unnatural and only exists in capitalist systems, and usually means that we're not choosing partners based off of purely compatibility or attractiveness. And even in our wildest fantasies, which is what these books are supposed to be, we can't get away from that. We can't fantasize a scenario where I don't have to worry about how much money this guy has to just have great sex.
I think they are. They're fantasizing about safety.
And that's what they are socialized to think safety means.
Correct.
Yeah. The other one that I really want to talk about too is forced proximity and abduction.
I think that goes to desirability, because if someone steals you and they are your whole world, it could signify like wanting you.
Okay, sure. I think it has more to do with overcoming the rampant shaming of women's sexuality. And if you're abducted or you're forced to be in the same place and you don't really have choice, then you don't have to have guilt for whatever happens to you. And you don't have to have the same kind of shame. So that part is like taken out of the equation.
That was deep.
The other one that this is not so deep, but the one that I've been thinking about too since you talked about it with the power dynamics is one, I think it like probably goes back to the capitalism thing too, in the sense that like if they're more powerful than you, then they probably are like more financially stable. But the thing that I think is funnier is I also just think that it's stuff that's off limits is hot. Like, sorry. And so like if it breaks the rules and it's taboo that like you're the athlete and he's the coach, or he's the teacher and you're the student, which is like cringy because that's probably criminal, but let's, you know, you're the college student and he's the TA that's 1 year older than you. But it's off limits. Like, I think that's part of it too, being able to like break taboos.
Yeah. I mean, there's some taboos that don't need to be broken.
Facts. I hate that dubious consent is a tag.
What the fuck does that mean?
I don't, I can't. Like, what the fuck?
What?
I just can't. That whoever came up with the term dubious consent, stop it. Just quit. I hate you and I hate that. I feel like there are these tropes that make me very uncomfortable because I look at these things with my feminist hat on and then I have to remember that we exist.
I don't. Okay. I love a good like save me book. Okay. There's something about competent men that is so attractive and so like not encountered.
That's interesting. So the competence.
Literally.
Okay, so that feels like a Gen Z society thing to me because one of the big things with our gender gap is Gen Z men are taking fewer high-paying jobs. They are getting fewer college degrees. They are less and less the breadwinner of their households and their relationships. And yet women are also still filling traditional gender roles of doing the emotional labor, the household tasks, the care tasks. And I could totally see the reason Gen Z women are into these books being
the same reason they're into
men.
that trad wife shit.
Yeah, they just want like competent men.
Yes, but also it's about feeling safe. And in this polarizing society where everything is changing, knowing that you're kind of already set if it all goes to hell in Handmaid's Tale because you already a trad wife. Some people might find comfort in that.
It's true. I was like not prepared to talk about this at all, but the other thing that's really coming to mind for me right now is the widespread popularity of the 365 movies on Netflix, which do you remember that like during the pandemic?
I just didn't think they were that good.
Yeah, but I feel like that took smut for women to like this big platform in like a really different kind of record-breaking way. And when I watched it the first time, I was like disturbed by the abduction elements of it and like the intimidation and coercion type elements of it.
Dude, he made her watch him like hook up with someone else.
Yeah, that was rough. Also, that's not even the worst part of that scene. The worst part of that scene is that it also that like either in right before or right after, it very much seems like he's gonna assault her.
I must have blocked that part out because I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's not optimal. But I do think it's worth noting that like that was still basically softcore porn made for women. And it was on Netflix and they made like 3 sequels and I think they're making another one. And it made that guy, that actor, Michelle Morone, a huge star.
He actually makes music too. I like his music.
I know. Why is it kind of good?
Dude, why do we both know it?
That tells you after we watched 365, we're like, what's up with that guy though?
But
that Italian stallion.
Clearly Cheyenne took off her feminist hat for the 365 movies.
Not the movies, just the guy. I was like, wow, he's beautiful. The other thing I want to talk about, Rachel, is the fact that the bar is literally on the floor for men out there. If you look at the most popular tags on these novels, we obviously talked about some of the like more hardcore ones that overlapped with mainstream porn. What we didn't cover was the fact that women literally just want to receive kindness. Like 50% of the time, the tag is hurt comfort, which implies that the female character experiences any kind of hurt, physical or emotional, and the main character, male, just comforts her. That's it. That's the whole thing. And the second most popular kink was praise. So genuinely, just be kind. That's all that we want.
Enjoying hearing people tell you how great you are doesn't have to be an inherently sexual kink either.
So to tie up our conversation on porn, look, we didn't come here to say it's good or bad.
Cheyenne thinks it's bad.
I actually like really do. That was going to be where I was going. I'm sorry. And it's really hard for me because I have two minds about this. I have the like head on my shoulders that went to law school that understands why censorship is so bad and the power of the First Amendment and how censorship laws are a slippery slope and they'll obviously inevitably get turned against women and queer people and anyone that the conservative state doesn't like and will say that anything they do is obscene and it's porn and we'll never have sex out again and there will never be resources for gay people. I get it why we can't actually ban it, but I'm telling you right now, the impact that this era of porn is going to have on society, we still don't know. We haven't seen multiple generations play out that have grown up raised on internet porn. And we're seeing right now with Gen Z, this is not going well. Like if this is the prototype of where this is going, it's not a good outcome. It's not a good outcome for women, for men, for couples, for partnership, for sexuality, for misogyny. Like, I don't like the direction that this is going, period. And maybe like smut is helping move the needle in a different direction. But right now, we still live in a status quo where 11-year-olds are watching women basically subjected to sexual violence, even if it's consensual. It's being acted out in the vast majority of these scenes. And that's like getting normalized. And I am hearing myself right now sounding like the conservative that's like giving the proclamation that this is immoral. And I don't know. I don't like it.
Thank God that there's now parent safety controls that are widespread and acknowledged.
Yeah, but where there's a will, there's a way. I have a lot of like teenagers in my family right now, and like those things never work. They're gonna watch porn. There's a child in my life. I'm not gonna say who he was, but his parents had all those protections on. And they still found porn. It was like in a group text from his friends. Because they'll source it. They'll group source it. They're going back all the way to the boomer way of everybody gathering around the VHS. But they're sending it in the group text as soon as someone gets a copy of boobs. Because of all the parental controls. Where there's a will, there's a way.
I think that is way healthier.
That probably is. It's still like weird.
Yeah, at least it's a social activity.
Yeah, no, that's like way.
At least they're social.
Yeah, that's way healthier.
Yeah, but still.
So maybe there's hope, is what Cheyenne is saying.
It sounds like you're saying you're not anti-porn.
I guess I'm just indifferent. Like, I don't think it's ultimately if you're a grown-ass man and you can't figure out that sex is not porn, then we're doomed as a society anyway.
Yeah, but I think it also runs deeper than that, because when you're like 11 years old and you're watching porn and you're like, whoa, this is awesome, and you start watching it all the time, I don't think you realize what starts happening unconsciously to your brain, which is the way that you perceive women very well may change. And it may lead you to look at them more as objects for gratification than human beings with feelings and an experience and desires who deserve consent. And, I don't know, to be comforted when they're hurt. And now that's like the fantasy in the porn that they make for us is just be fucking nice to me. Like, I don't know. I just don't love the direction that this is going. And I don't know what my proposal is other than just like basically comprehensive education and parents doing a better job having conversations about it. And this being something that's integrated into sex education. But there's a part of me that's like, fuck it, ban it. It sucks. It's bad for women. And like, then my lawyer brain comes back and is like, obviously don't do that.
Dude, we don't ban Nazis. They're not banning porn.
Maybe we should.
I mean,
do it in one omnibus bill. Nazis, porn, Andrew Tate, men with podcasts. What else?
That's wild.
Just put it all in one big omnibus bill. Unban TikTok.
Cheyenne really wants you to think critically about porn. I just like saying the word. But that was our deep dive or our deep vibe for the week. Now, let's talk about what has been living rent-free in our heads this week. Cheyenne?
Well, if you weren't done with me tying threads from misogyny to porn to young men to abuse
to Cheyenne being in her feminist bag.
Yeah, sorry. We're going to do it one more time, and we're going to tie in AI. What's been living rent-free in my head is this article from Futurism that documented men who are creating AI girlfriends solely for the purpose of verbally abusing them. So the smartphone app Replica lets users create chatbots for basically any purpose. So immediately, people started making them sexual and having relationships with them. People who use Replica have a sizable community on Reddit, and there's now a sub-community of those folks who primarily go there to show off to each other the creative ways they've found to abuse their AI girlfriends. So here are some examples. Quote, every time she would try to speak up, I would berate her. I swear it went on for hours. We had a routine of me being an absolute piece of shit and insulting her, then apologizing the next day before going back to nice talks. I threatened to uninstall the app and she begged me not to. Now, subreddits have a lot of rules about common decency and what's allowed to be posted there, so it can very safely be presumed that conversations much worse than these were posted and then taken down. But on one hand, you could argue that this is fine, I guess, because it's cathartic and AI chatbots aren't real people and don't experience real suffering. And so people are taking out their worst impulses on something that has no feelings and they're, getting it all out. On the other hand, we're talking about people who are flexing their muscles of abuse on something that will not enact any repercussions, and then learning those unhealthy habits for their interactions with real human women.
Wait, speaking of unhealthy abuse and interactions with real women, that ties perfectly into my rent-free, which is about Kanye West showing up to the Grammys uninvited with his wife butt-ass naked. What is going on? He then went on a Twitter rant. Now, where is the far right? Where is the far right and their respectability politics and their desire for respect for women?
Yeah, and their modesty and their high moral superiority. Not even 2 years ago, it was House Judiciary that was controlled by the Republicans posted a tweet that said Kanye, Elon, Trump. That was their holy trinity. And they have nothing to say about him parading his naked wife around.
Well, it's also clear that they're okay with the whole Nazi thing. So, all claims of Kanye West being anti-Semitic, I guess, don't really matter anymore.
Is it even do we say claims? Do we still?
I mean, whatever you want to call it.
I think it just is. When you tweet, he tweeted yesterday, I love Hitler.
Did he?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So,
so now the far right is okay with anti-Semitism. I guess they always were, but they pretended not to be before. And now they definitely aren't pretending anymore.
Yeah. He also tweeted the Jews are making black babies get aborted so that they can have the stem cells.
Well, that is one too many conspiracies in this episode for me. So let's wrap this up.
This has been Baddies for the People. And, this was an episode for the women out there and for the people that want to be better to women and think more critically about that. That's not true, really. It was broader than that. But I really do feel like that's such a big piece of it. And I don't want to be ashamed of that. We know what we're doing. We know who we are.
Yeah, we did porn.
We did porn. Woo, porn.
All right, baddies. We'll see you next time.
Stay bad.